There are farmers who make decisions based on gut feel, and there are farmers who make decisions based on data. Nathan Cross was the second type. Nathan was 39 years old, and he'd been farming 650 acres of corn and soybeans in eastern Iowa since 2012. He had a degree in agricultural business from Iowa State, and he approached farming the way an engineer approached a problem. Everything was measured. Everything was tracked. Everything was optimized. Nathan didn't buy equipment because it looked good, or because his neighbors ran it, or because a dealer gave him a good deal over coffee. He bought equipment because the data told him it was the right choice. And in 2021, the data told him to switch from John Deere to Massey Ferguson. Nathan had been running John Deere equipment his entire career. 2 8R series tractors, 1 S series combine, standard precision ag systems. The equipment was fine, it worked, but Nathan had started to wonder if fine was good enough. In the winter of 2020, Nathan decided to run a comprehensive equipment evaluation. He wanted to know if the brand he'd been loyal to for 9 years was actually the best choice or just the comfortable choice. He created a spreadsheet. He identified the metrics that mattered: fuel consumption, maintenance costs, hydraulic cycle times, operator comfort, cab noise levels, visibility, repair frequency, parts availability, resale value. Then he started collecting data from other farmers. He joined online forums. He attended equipment demos. He talked to operators running Deere, Case, New Holland, and Massey Ferguson. By March 2021, Nathan had enough data to make a comparison, and the results surprised him. Massey Ferguson's 8S series tractors consistently outperformed comparable Deere 8R tractors in fuel efficiency. The numbers showed 15 to 22% better fuel economy depending on the operation. Maintenance costs on Massey Ferguson equipment were running 18 to 25% lower than Deere based on reports from farmers who'd tracked both brands. Hydraulic cycle times were faster on Massey Ferguson tractors. The Dyna VT transmission provided smoother power delivery than Deere's E23 transmission. Cab noise levels were lower. Visibility was better. The controls were more intuitive. Nathan sat in his office looking at the data and felt something click. Massey Ferguson wasn't just competitive with Deere. On the metrics that actually mattered for daily operation, the Massey Ferguson equipment was better. Not by a huge margin, but by a measurable, consistent margin across multiple categories. Nathan called his wife Emily that evening. "I think I'm going to switch to Massey Ferguson." Emily had been a farm wife long enough to know that Nathan didn't make statements like that lightly. "You've been running Deere your whole life, I know. But the data says Massey Ferguson is better. And I can't ignore data." What does better mean? Better fuel economy, lower maintenance costs, better ergonomics. The numbers are clear. Emily thought about it. How much is this going to cost? Nathan pulled up his financing projections. If I trade my 2 8R tractors for 2 Massey Ferguson 8S tractors, I'm looking at about $140,000 in new debt. But the fuel savings alone will cover most of the payment difference, and the lower maintenance costs put me ahead. Emily nodded. If the data supports it, then do it. Nathan called a Massey Ferguson dealer in Cedar Rapids the next day. The sales manager's name was Ron. Mid-40s. Straightforward. He didn't oversell. "Ron, I've been doing a detailed equipment comparison, and your 8S tractors are outperforming Deere on most of the metrics I care about. I want to make the switch, but I need to verify the numbers first." Ron didn't sound surprised. "What do you want to test?" "I want to run one of your tractors side by side with my Deere for a full week. Same implements, same fields, same conditions. I want to track fuel consumption, operator fatigue, and cycle times." Ron agreed immediately. "We can set that up. When do you want to start?" "Next week." Ron delivered a Massey Ferguson 8S 245 to Nathan's farm on a Monday morning. Nathan spent the next 7 days running it alongside his Deere 8370R. He pulled the same implements. He worked the same fields. He logged every gallon of fuel. He timed every operation. He even measured cab noise levels with a decibel meter. By the end of the week, Nathan had the data he needed. The Massey Ferguson 8S 245 burned 18% less fuel than his Deere 8370R doing identical work. Hydraulic cycle times on the Massey Ferguson were 12% faster. Cab noise in the Massey Ferguson was 4 decibels quieter. Operator fatigue after 8 hours in the Massey Ferguson cab was noticeably lower based on Nathan's own assessment. Nathan compiled the data into a report. He sent it to Ron. The numbers check out. I want to make the switch. Ron called him back an hour later. Nathan, I've been selling equipment for 18 years, and I've never had a customer do this level of analysis before buying. I respect it. The data doesn't lie. No, it doesn't. Let me put together a proposal for you. Nathan traded both of his Deere 8R tractors for 2 Massey Ferguson 8S series tractors in May 2021, an 8S by 245 and an 8S 205. Total cost after trade-ins, $142,000 financed over 6 years. The tractors were delivered in early June, bright red, loaded with precision ag technology, everything Nathan had specified. Nathan didn't just start using them, he started tracking them. He created a new spreadsheet: fuel consumption per operation, maintenance costs per hour, downtime incidents, operator comfort ratings. Everything measurable got measured. By the end of summer 2021, Nathan had 650 combined hours on the 2 Massey Ferguson tractors, and the data confirmed everything he'd projected. Fuel consumption, 19% better than his old Deere tractors. Maintenance costs, 22% lower. Hydraulic efficiency, 11% faster cycle times. Operator comfort, significantly better based on Nathan's daily logs. Nathan compiled the data and posted it on an Iowa farming forum in September 2021. He didn't editorialize, he just presented the numbers. Side-by-side comparisons, fuel logs, maintenance records, cost analysis. The response was immediate. Half the forum was impressed. Guys asked questions: what model, what transmission, how are you measuring fuel consumption? The other half was skeptical. One farmer wrote, "You can't tell me Massey Ferguson beats Deere. I've run green iron for 40 years and nothing touches it." Another wrote, "This looks like dealer propaganda. Nobody gets 19% better fuel economy just by switching brands." Nathan replied to every skeptic with data, photos of his fuel receipts, screenshots of his tracking spreadsheets, hour-by-hour comparisons. But the doubt persisted, and Nathan realized something. People didn't want data. They wanted validation of the choices they'd already made. But Nathan didn't care. He had the numbers, and the numbers were undeniable. Fall 2021 brought harvest. Nathan ran his Massey Ferguson tractors on grain cart duty and post-harvest tillage. The performance stayed consistent. By the end of the year, Nathan had logged 1,240 hours across both tractors. Total fuel savings compared to his projected Deere baseline, $11,400. Total maintenance cost savings, $2,800. Nathan was ahead by $14,200 in year 1. After accounting for the increased equipment payment, his net savings were $3,900. Not a windfall, but a measurable improvement, and the data proved it. Nathan spoke at an Iowa Farm Bureau meeting in January 2022. He presented his findings, showed his spreadsheets, walked through his methodology. The room was divided. Younger farmers were interested, older farmers were skeptical. One guy in the back raised his hand. "Nathan, this is impressive work. But you're comparing brand new Massey Ferguson tractors to 6-year-old Deere tractors. That's not apples to apples." Nathan had anticipated that. "You're right. So I also compared my fuel consumption data to 3 other farmers in this room who are running current model Deere 8R tractors. The Massey Ferguson still beats them by 14 to 17%. The guy sat down. Another farmer stood up. "What about resale value? Deere holds value better than Massey Ferguson. You might save money on fuel, but you'll lose it when you trade." Nathan nodded. "That's a fair point. Deere does have better residual value in this region. But my analysis shows that over a 6-year ownership period, the fuel and maintenance savings more than offset the lower trade-in value." The room stayed quiet. Nathan had won the argument, with data, but he hadn't changed anyone's mind. Spring 2022 brought planting season. Nathan ran his Massey Ferguson tractors hard. The fuel savings continued. The maintenance costs stayed low. By summer 2022, Nathan had become the unofficial Massey Ferguson evangelist in eastern Iowa. Farmers called him with questions. Dealers referenced his data. Online forums shared his spreadsheets. Nathan didn't mind. He liked helping people make informed decisions. But in July 2022, something happened that Nathan hadn't accounted for in any of his spreadsheets. His neighbor Frank Dietrich stopped by on a Tuesday afternoon. Frank was 71 years old. He'd been farming the ground adjacent to Nathan's operation for 48 years. Frank owned 880 acres, free and clear. Good ground, well maintained. Frank had been talking about retirement for 3 years, but he kept pushing it back. His son lived in Denver and wasn't interested in farming. Frank didn't have a succession plan. Nathan had always assumed Frank would eventually sell the ground or lease it to one of the bigger operators in the area. But on that Tuesday afternoon, Frank had a different idea. "Nathan, I'm finally ready to retire. I'm selling 320 acres and I'm leasing out the other 560. I wanted to talk to you first." Nathan felt his heart rate spike. "Frank, I'd be very interested in leasing that ground. I figured you would be. You're a good operator. You take care of your land. I trust you." Nathan smiled. "What kind of lease terms are you thinking?" Frank pulled out a piece of paper. "I've talked to a farm management consultant. Market rate for this ground is about $285 per acre. I'm willing to do $275 if we structure it right." Nathan did the math. 560 acres at $270 per acre was $154,000 in annual rent. That was a big commitment, but it would take his operation from 1,650 acres to 2,210 acres. The additional ground would give him better economies of scale. "What does structure it right mean?" Frank looked at him. "I'm keeping 200 acres that my grandson might want to farm someday. My son-in-law Jerry is keeping 120 acres that he's been renting from me. We're going to keep sharing some equipment, specifically my planter and my grain cart." Nathan felt something tighten in his chest. "What kind of equipment are we talking about?" Frank pulled out another piece of paper. "I've got a 2019 Deere 1775 NT planter, 60 foot. Jerry's got a Deere grain cart. If you lease my ground, you'll need to use my planter for the 560 acres. It's part of the deal. Jerry wants to keep using it for his 120 acres, and my grandson might use it in a couple years." Nathan blinked. "Frank, I don't run Deere equipment anymore. I switched to Massey Ferguson." Frank's expression didn't change. "I know, I've heard about your whole data analysis thing, but the planter's part of the deal, Nathan. It's set up for Deere tractors. The monitors are integrated with Deere systems, and Jerry's already comfortable with it. Can I use my Massey Ferguson tractors to pull it?" Frank shook his head. "The planter's set up with Deere's precision ag systems, the auto steer, the section control, the monitor integration. You'd have to pull it with a Deere tractor, or you'd lose all the precision functionality." Nathan felt his stomach drop. "So if I want to lease your ground, I have to buy or lease a Deere tractor?" Frank nodded. "Or you don't lease the ground." Nathan stood there in his driveway trying to process what he was hearing. He'd just spent a year proving that Massey Ferguson was better than Deere on every measurable metric. He'd optimized his entire operation around that equipment. He'd built his reputation on the data, and now he was being told that if he wanted to expand his operation, he had to go back to Deere. Not because Deere was better, but because the social infrastructure of shared equipment in his community was built around Deere. "Let me think about it, Frank." Frank put the paper back in his pocket. "No rush. But I've got 2 other guys interested. I need an answer by the end of the month." Nathan went inside and sat at his kitchen table. Emily found him there 20 minutes later. "What's wrong?" "Frank's leasing out his ground, 560 acres. But there's a condition. I have to use his Deere planter, which means I have to have a Deere tractor." Emily sat down. "Can't you just buy a used Deere?" Nathan ran the numbers in his head. "A used Deere 8R tractor that's compatible with Frank's planter would cost me at least $220,000. Plus, I'd have to maintain 2 different brands of equipment, 2 different parts inventories, 2 different dealer relationships. So don't take the ground." Nathan looked at her. "It's 560 acres, Emily. At my current margins, that's an additional $78,000 in annual profit. Over 10 years, that's $750,000. Emily was quiet for a moment. "So what are you going to do?" Nathan didn't have an answer. Nathan spent the next week running scenarios. Option 1, lease Frank's ground and buy a used Deere tractor. Total cost about $220,000. Annual profit from the additional acres minus the equipment cost would net him about $42,000 per year. Over 10 years, that was $420,000. Option 2. Don't lease Frank's ground. Keep his operation at 1,650 acres. Stay with his all-Massey Ferguson fleet. Maintain the operational efficiency he'd worked so hard to achieve. Option 3. Sell his Massey Ferguson tractors and switch back to Deere entirely. But that would mean taking a loss on the Massey Ferguson equipment and admitting that his data-driven decision had been wrong. Not technically wrong, but practically wrong. Nathan called Ron, the Massey Ferguson sales manager. "Ron, I've got a situation." He explained the whole thing: Frank's ground, the shared planter, the Deere requirement. Ron was quiet for a moment. "Nathan, I hate to say this, but you're running into the reality of rural equipment infrastructure. In a lot of farming communities, the informal equipment sharing arrangements are built around one or two dominant brands, usually Deere. If you're outside that ecosystem, you lose access to those cooperative opportunities. So what do I do?" Ron sighed. "That's up to you. But I'll tell you this. I've seen this happen before. A farmer switches to Massey Ferguson or Case or New Holland because the equipment is legitimately better, but then they can't participate in local equipment sharing or custom hire arrangements because everyone else is running Deere. It's not about performance. It's about compatibility." Nathan hung up and sat in his office. He'd beaten Deere on every metric: fuel economy, maintenance costs, hydraulics, operator comfort. The data was undeniable. But he'd lost on the one metric he hadn't measured: social compatibility. In eastern Iowa, where Deere dominated the equipment landscape, being the only red tractor in a sea of green iron meant you couldn't participate in the informal networks that made farming more efficient. You couldn't share equipment. You couldn't trade custom work. You couldn't borrow a part from a neighbor in a pinch. Nathan had optimized for individual performance. But farming wasn't just an individual operation. It was a community operation. And the community ran on Deere. Nathan called Frank at the end of the month. "Frank, I can't take the ground under those conditions." Frank sounded disappointed. "You sure, Nathan? It's good ground. I know it is. But I'd have to buy a Deere tractor to make it work, and that doesn't fit my operation." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Well, I appreciate you being straight with me. I'm going to lease it to Dennis Vogel. He's running all Deere, so the planner arrangement works for him." Nathan hung up and felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years, like he'd just lost. Not because his equipment was bad, but because his equipment was incompatible. Summer 2022 passed. Nathan kept running his Massey Ferguson tractors. They continued to outperform Deere on every metric he tracked. But Nathan couldn't stop thinking about the 560 acres he'd turned down. He ran the math again and again. Over 20 years, that ground would have generated over $1.5 million in profit. He'd given up $1.5 million because he didn't have a Deere tractor. In September 2022, another opportunity came up. A farmer named Carl Hendricks was looking for someone to do custom combining on 240 acres. Carl ran Deere equipment. He had a Deere grain cart. He wanted someone with a Deere combine so the technology would integrate seamlessly. Nathan's Massey Ferguson Ideal combine was faster and more efficient than most Deere combines in the area. But Carl didn't care. "I need someone with Deere," Carl said. "The monitors have to talk to each other." Nathan didn't get the work. It went to a guy with an older, slower Deere combine, because compatibility mattered more than performance. By fall 2022, Nathan had started to understand the full scope of what he'd done. He'd optimized his equipment for individual metrics, but he'd made himself incompatible with the broader farming community. And in rural Iowa, where land access and cooperative arrangements often mattered more than equipment efficiency, that incompatibility had a cost. Winter 2023 brought another problem. Nathan's Massey Ferguson 8S.245 developed a hydraulic leak. Minor issue. Nathan needed a specific seal kit. He called the Massey Ferguson dealer in Cedar Rapids. They didn't have it in stock. They could order it, but it would take 4 days. Nathan called a neighbor who ran Deere equipment, asked if he could borrow a tractor for a couple days until his part came in. The neighbor hesitated. "Nathan, I'd help you out, but my spare tractor is set up with Deere-specific implements. The hydraulic couplers won't match your equipment." Nathan ended up renting a tractor from a dealer 90 miles away. It cost him $840 for 3 days. If he'd been running Deere, he could have borrowed his neighbor's tractor for free, because Deere equipment was standardized and interchangeable across the community. Massey Ferguson wasn't. Nathan sat in his office that night and added $840 to his cost tracking spreadsheet. The Massey Ferguson tractors were still ahead on fuel and maintenance costs. But the hidden costs of incompatibility were starting to add up. Spring 2023 brought the biggest blow. Nathan's landlord for 480 acres, a guy named Roger Paulson, called in March. "Nathan, I wanted to give you advance notice. I'm not renewing your lease for 2024. Nathan felt his chest tighten. "Roger, is there a problem? Have I not taken care of the ground? No. You've been a great tenant, but my nephew is coming back to farm. He's taking over 300 acres, and he's partnering with the Dietrich family on the other 180. They're going to share equipment and labor." The Dietrich family ran all Deere equipment. They had a cooperative arrangement with 3 other families in the area. They shared planters, combined sprayers, and labor. It was an efficient setup, but it only worked because everyone ran compatible equipment. Nathan wasn't compatible. "Roger, I understand." He hung up and sat at his desk. 480 acres. Gone. Not because of his farming practices, not because of crop performance, but because he couldn't participate in the equipment-sharing network that was becoming standard in his area. Nathan pulled up his financial projections. Losing 480 acres would drop his operation from 1,650 acres to 1,170 acres. His annual revenue would fall by about $168,000. His profit would drop by about $62,000. That was enough to change everything. His debt coverage would get tighter. His equipment utilization would drop. His cost per acre would increase. Nathan spent the next month trying to find replacement acres. He called every landowner he knew. He contacted farm management companies. He looked at ground as far as 50 miles away. Nothing worked. Every good piece of ground that came up for lease went to farmers who were part of the local Deere-based equipment sharing networks. Nathan was on the outside. By May 2023, Nathan had accepted the reality. He was going to be farming 1,170 acres instead of 1,650 acres. His operation was shrinking. Not because he was a bad farmer, but because he'd optimized for the wrong thing. He'd optimized for equipment performance, and he'd lost on community compatibility. Summer 2023 was brutal. Nathan ran his Massey Ferguson tractors across fewer acres. The equipment still performed beautifully. The fuel economy was still excellent. The maintenance costs were still low. But Nathan was making less money because he had less ground to farm. Fall 2023 brought harvest. Nathan combined 170 acres. His yields were good. His costs were low. His Massey Ferguson equipment performed flawlessly, but his revenue was down 29% from 2 years ago, and his profit was down 38%. Nathan sat in his office in November looking at his year-end financials. He'd won every technical argument, but he'd lost the business. Winter 2024 brought a decision. Nathan called Ron, the Massey Ferguson dealer. "Ron, I need to talk about selling my tractors." Ron sighed. "I was wondering when you'd call. What happened?" "I lost 480 acres because I couldn't participate in equipment sharing arrangements. I've lost custom work opportunities. I've lost cooperative agreements. I'm getting squeezed out of the community farming networks because I'm running the wrong color equipment." Ron was quiet for a moment. "Nathan, I'm sorry. I've seen this before. Massey Ferguson makes great equipment, but in areas where one brand dominates the social infrastructure, you're fighting an uphill battle. What will my tractors bring on trade?" Ron checked his system. "I can probably get you $195,000 for the 8S245 and $175,000 for the 8S205. That's $370,000 total." Nathan felt sick. "I paid $567,000 for them 2.5 years ago. I know. But used Massey Ferguson equipment doesn't move well in Iowa. The market's flooded with Deere. That's what buyers want. So I'd lose $197,000 switching back to Deere. Probably, yeah." Nathan hung up. He'd proven that Massey Ferguson was better. The data was irrefutable. But the market didn't care about data. The market cared about compatibility. And compatibility had a price. Spring 2025. Nathan still farms in eastern Iowa, but he's not farming 650 acres anymore. He's down to 1,170 acres, and he's still looking for replacement ground. He still runs his two Massey Ferguson 8S tractors. They're about to hit 13,400 hours. They still outperform comparable Deere tractors on every metric Nathan tracks. But Nathan's not posting his data online anymore. He's not speaking at Farm Bureau meetings. He's not evangelizing for Massey Ferguson. Because he learned something expensive. Equipment performance doesn't matter if it makes you incompatible with the community you farm in. Nathan beat Deere on fuel economy. He beat them on maintenance costs. He beat them on hydraulics and ergonomics and operator comfort. He won every technical comparison, but he lost on the metric that actually mattered. Community compatibility. In eastern Iowa, where informal equipment sharing networks determine land access, and where cooperative arrangements make or break operations, being the only Massey Ferguson farmer in a sea of Deere equipment meant isolation. And isolation in agriculture is fatal. Nathan's tractors still run. They still save fuel. They still cost less to maintain. The data still proves he made the right equipment choice. But the data didn't account for the social infrastructure of farming. The handshake agreements to share a planter, the neighbor who lends you a tractor when yours breaks down, the landowner who wants you on his ground because you fit into the local equipment ecosystem. Nathan optimized for individual performance. But farming isn't an individual sport. It's a community sport. And the community runs on Deere. Nathan's Massey Ferguson tractors beat Deere on every metric, except the one that mattered: compatibility. And in rural Iowa, compatibility is everything.